offer you this lesson from Unity of the Keys Spiritual Center.
Let's give a hand to the music team. So awesome. How many of you have heard the story of Unity before? Okay, so I know it'll be a review for some of you, but fresh for many of you. And I think that every person is their own kind of historian, so the stories I share with you today may be different than things that you've heard in the past. I am a collector of stories, and I love the co-founders, Myrtle and Charles Filmore, and I loved meeting people that knew them who shared stories about them with me. The evolution of the Unity movement, as we know it today, began at the turn of the last century, and through tremendous courage, facing all manner, like we do, of disease and unexpected tragedies and the Great Depression, and every kind of potential despair, a committed group of ordinary people like us cooperated with each other and the God of their understanding to live out their faith together and co-create a place they called Unity Farm near Kansas City, Missouri, or as they say, Missouri. It was a great experiment in truth, and we're still proving these principles today that they practiced in the Bible Belt in the late 1800s and early 1900s, traveling on horse and buggy to learn to pray, to heal, to minister to the needs of others. They published books, magazines, organized tent meetings, spiritual gatherings where people came on horseback with their tents, and created the very first telephone prayer ministry to pray for anyone, anytime, 24/7, about anything. One question you will never hear anyone ever ask you when you call Silent Unity is, what is your religion? The only question you will hear that still is the question today is, how may we pray with you? Not how may I pray with or for you, but how may we, the collective, united spirit within each and every one of us, when together in unity is far greater than the sum of its parts. How may we, not just here in the physical, but we, our ancestors, Christ Jesus, and all the saints from the beginning of all time, how may we pray for what you ask with you? I count myself truly blessed, as Aaron, I think, probably does too, to have been a co-worker on the night shift at Silent Unity for 2 years. Above the door, when you walk through the prayer room, it says, "It is not I, but the Christ within that does the work." An important reminder. We are never alone, and we are the divine instruments. It's not the personality. Jesus never took credit for any manner of healings or any of the myriad of miracles that occurred during his ministry. He would say, "Your faith has made you well. Go and don't do it again. Whatever you did to create this, your faith, your belief has made you well, whole, healed." I like to say that the Filmores took Jesus at his word when he said, "Follow me." So relax now and hear the story of unity with the ears of your heart. It begins, it's good we're doing Birthday Sunday today, because both of the Filmores were born in August. And so we begin on August 6th, 1845. A time before computers, a time before the automobile, a time quite different than we know it today. On August 6th, 1845, a divine idea in the mind of God was born. And she became known as Myrtle. She was a very active young girl. She likes to say that she was called a tomboy. And she loved nature, tree climbing, hiking, and was an avid reader who graduated from Oberlin College literary course for ladies and became a teacher. She was considered, hi Myrtle, she was considered sickly and frail by doctors, but she never seemed to let that belief interfere with her life. She moved alone from Ohio to Texas to pursue a calling to teach children when she graduated from college. And that's where she met Charles Filmore, in Texas, at a poetry reading. They were part of a group of young people, and interestingly enough, Charles Filmore also took the literary course for ladies. He did. He was tutored by a woman that happened to be the wife. Her name was Mrs. Carolyn Taylor, of an Army officer stationed in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And so she tutored him in the same course that Myrtle took, because she was a graduate of that same class. So you can't make this stuff up. Charles and Myrtle had so much in common intellectually. But Charles liked to say that when he heard this beautiful redhead reciting this poem, that an inner voice said to him, "Charles, this is your wife." It took him quite a few years to convince Myrtle of that, however. Charles Sherlock Filmore was born on an Indian reservation in St. Cloud, Minnesota on August 22nd, 1854. He was the son of a trader and a trapper, and he wandered in and out of teepees in his youth and had great respect for Native American wisdom. Grandma Filmore used to like to tell the story about Charles being taken out of her arms by a band of Lakota Sioux Indians, fully dressed in ceremonial robes and painted to the hilt, and later returned to her, the terrified mother, unharmed. Charles often said he felt he was being blessed as an infant in some kind of mystical ceremony for the mission that he would later have in his life. Us, unity. I love that story because it tells so much about our roots being diverse and inclusive. Although our co-founders were intelligent, hardworking, open-minded, and in many ways diligent to this truth that they were beginning to understand, in 1886, they were poor, almost destitute, with more bills than they could pay, and Myrtle was told she would soon die of incurable tuberculosis. She was told she would have only 6 months to live. And by then, they were students of truth. They had, Charles estimated, attended over 100 lectures in metaphysics and spiritual teachings. And they went to a lecture by one of their colleagues, E.B. Weeks, a metaphysician, and he said these words: "You are a child of God, and you do not inherit sickness." Say that with me in the eye. I am a child of God, and I do not inherit sickness. So Myrtle heard those words, and something inside of her resonated. She had some kind of an epiphany. Charles liked to say that he almost fell asleep during the lecture. He didn't get much out of it. But she did. She somehow began to realize deep within her soul that sickness was not her destiny, that she was made in the image and likeness of God, with all of the resources of God, with all of the qualities to heal herself. And so she began working with that affirmation and blessing her body and talking to the parts of her body. She says in a little booklet that we're going to share with you next week, we hope, that life is intelligent, but intelligence needs to be directed. And so she began to talk to the parts of her body and say, "Okay, liver, come alive with vitality. Okay, heart, you're beating with the heart of God." And every day she sat in the silence. So her method was group meditation. She sat in her living room with her friends, and they meditated, and they affirmatively prayed, and they called themselves at that time the Society of Silent Help. And they would pray for anyone, for any prayer need. She also sat in the silence and would go into deep meditation, sometimes for hours every day. And she did these affirmations and denials. So denial meaning, there is nothing more powerful than God. I deny this thought of tuberculosis, for example. I deny that it is more powerful than the spirit of healing within me. You know, not psychological denial. People get confused about that. Not the kind of denial like, it's not happening, there's not war in the world, not that. But the denying that there is anything more powerful than God. It's an important practice, Sometimes I have the same negative thought. It just haunts me. And I think, I thought I was done with that. And then it keeps coming, and I have to say, "Get thee behind me, Satan," right? I don't give power to that thinking, and I affirm something greater than that thought, something I may not completely be in alignment with, but I aspire to. So, Myrtle, gradually over many years, experienced a total recovery. And she lived 40 years longer than expected. Her husband, Charles, seeing the effect on her, started using her techniques to heal himself. Charles had had a skating accident as a child and had a withered leg and hip problems and walked with a cane and had a lot of pain. And although he was a bit of a skeptic, he could not, discount the amazing results that this little band of his friends was having in his own living room. And so he joined them. But this is what he said about it. "The muddle was so deep that for a time I was inclined to ridicule. Yet I could not get away from the evidence of a great power back of the flood of contradictory statements. I noticed that all the teachers and writers talked a great deal about the omnipresent, omniscient God who is spirit and accessible to everyone. Kind of reminds me of the jokes that George Carlin used to say about God. Anybody know those comedy routines? You know, God is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, almighty, all-knowing, all-powerful, and he needs your money. Charles would have loved George Carlin. He had that kind of wit, and he had a great sense of humor. And he said to himself, and this is Charles' words, "In this babble, I will go to headquarters. If I'm spirit and this God they all talk about so much is spirit, then we can somehow communicate, or the whole thing is a fraud." And this is his description of the method that he used. "I then commenced, sitting in the silence every night at a certain hour and tried to get in touch with God. There was no real enthusiasm about it, no soul desire. It was a cold, calculating business method. I was there on time. Every night I tried in all conceivable ways to realize that my mind was in touch with Supreme Mind. And in this cold, calculating method, this intellectual attitude, one can understand why he didn't get really great results." However, God speaks to us in the language that we can hear. It's different. Some people get almost audible voices. Some people get a sensing. Some people see things. However, Charles, being a hard-headed businessman, he began to notice that guidance came to him in his dreams. He realized after the closing of a piece of property that he had purchased that he had dreamed the whole transaction exactly like it occurred months before. And this is what he said. "After that, I watched my dreams closely and found that there was a wider intelligence manifesting in my sleep than I seemed to possess in the waking state. And it flashed over me one day that this was the mode of communication that had been established in response to my desire for information from headquarters." Isn't that beautiful? And he said, "This kept up ever since as I focused on it with growing interest, and I could fill a book with my experiences. Everything," he said, "which is necessary for me to know is shown to me. And I have time without number been saved from false steps by this guidance." In meditation, Charles applied these healing methods to his own body. He too sat in the silence. And Rosemary Moray, his granddaughter, used to tell me that he would go into the silence anytime he wanted to. And she grew up with him, so she thought that's what grandfathers did. And she would be playing with kids, and Charles Filmore would just close his eyes and be silent for some time. And the kids would go, "What is he doing?" And she'd say, "Well, he's going into the silence. Like, don't you know? That's what grandfathers do." Sometimes, like Myrtle, for hours, he would go into the silence and he would affirm the life in his body. And his hip healed and grew stronger, and his leg grew longer. And he threw out his cane and he walked normally in the later stages of his life. With the courage and the conviction of their own personal demonstrations, Charles and Myrtle Filmore and their group dove right in. They were all in. And in 1889, they published a magazine before the word unity came to them called Modern Thought. And here's what they said. The wonderful success of absent healing demonstrates that bodily presence is not necessary to those in spiritual harmony. Everyone is invited to join the Society of Silent Help. The only requirement is to sit in a quiet place and pray for not less than 15 minutes at 10 o'clock every night. At one of the times that they gathered, Charles did hear an audible voice, which was very rare for him. And it was unity, unity. And he started speaking. He was so startled that he startled the members of his prayer group. And he said, "Unity, unity, that's the name." And that's how our name came, straight from a revelation through one of our co-founders to us. And isn't it a great name? You know, you can't be a unity-ism or a unity-in, right? It's just unity, right? It leaves no one out. And this is what Charles Filmores said about his understanding of what unity is. Unity is a link in this beautiful chain. But these are his words. Unity is a link in the great educational movement inaugurated by Jesus Christ. Our objective is to discern the truth in Christianity and prove it. The truth we teach isn't new. Neither do we claim special revelations or discovery of new religious principles. Our purpose is simply to help and teach humankind to use and prove the eternal truths taught by the Master. The Filmores had many teachers as they developed themselves personally and as they began to co-create with Spirit this movement of Spirit called unity. One of the most important teachers they had, I think, was Dr. Emma Curtis Hopkins. There were 87 students who attended 11 classes with her in Kansas City. They went by horse and buggy to get there, or train. And they met in Chicago, which, if you can think about Chicago to Kansas City by horse and buggy, it's difficult. But they did this, all 87 of them, from all corners of the U.S. They studied with her because she was an advanced mystic. And they sat with her in the silence. And Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were one of 111 people who completed her entire seminary in 1893. It was said of Dr. Hopkins that she could quote all the world Bibles and literary masterpieces and weave them together in a seamless tapestry of truth that was ancient and eclectic in its presentation. And I've tried on many occasions to understand her 1887 class lectures, which the Filmores attended. I think I'm a pretty smart person, but a lot of times it's over my head, because for her class lessons, it was common for her to quote Emerson, Lao Tzu, the Buddha, the Bhagavad Gita, and Jesus. She was fluent in many languages, and she just assumed you'd read the texts. So that is the foundation of unity, a deep awareness that what Jesus was doing was to carry on the truth that would eventually set us all free. And before him, there were other great teachers, and there have been great teachers all along, and there is no competition in God. One of the great things about unity is that our focus is on prayer and meditation. And this can make it one of the most difficult religions, as Eric Butterworth has said, because you are simply face to face with God and yourself. There's nowhere to go, no one to blame, no ecclesiastical organization for you to give your power over to. You realize that your life is the result of your keeping of these spiritual principles. And God can do no more for you than God can do through you. So I want to take us back where we began our service today, to the one new commandment that Jesus gave us before he died. They call it his last testament, and that is love. He said, love one another as I have loved you. That's how you'll know that you are truly my disciples. He said, I'm not calling you disciples or servants or anything else anymore. I'm calling you friends. And I ask you to go forth with these teachings and love. Be patient. Be kind. Care for one another. If you do this, then the joy, he said, that's in me will be in you. So I want you, when you go home today, to look in the mirror and to say, my name is love. God is love and I am love. That's what God calls me, love. I see love. You are love. Look at the person around you and say, I see love. You are love. So I officially begin my ministry here in the name of love. Thank you.